Conor McGregor will undoubtedly go down as an all-time great, the double champion, one of the best featherweights of all time, but in reality, his prime was way shorter than most fighters. Well, one way to put it is he really didn't have that much of a prime. Now, the athletic prime for an athlete is from the ages of 20 to 30 for most sports, but generally the consensus in MMA is that your athletic prime is really from 27 to 33. This is mainly because there's no such thing as an MMA-based fighter, at least until recently. Most of these fighters are coming over from wrestling, kickboxing, boxing, so when they get into MMA, they need a good amount of years to learn the other practices. Conor was 28 when he fought Eddie, which is absolutely demolished Eddie, and from there we all know what happens. He went on to fight Mayweather, and in between Mayweather and his next fight, we saw a lot of time off, a lot of controversy that also led to him needing to take time off. And then we get the announcement of him versus Khabib, which is him coming off over a year of not fighting in MMA. The Floyd fight was in 2017, he became double champ in 2016, so this is a lot of time without actually practicing MMA at a competitive level consistently. And of course we get more bust controversies, and the big assumption that in between the Mayweather and Khabib fight is when he really started picking up his drug and alcohol addiction, especially with the launch of Proper 12. Yes, this is technically within the years of 27 to 33, but you really have to think, you have to get back into fight shape, you have to get back into training and back into that mindset. So even though you're within those years, can you really be at your best if you haven't been competing at a high level for at least a year of training? So when the Khabib fight happens, we all know the outbreak after, the suspension after, that led to him having to do community service. There was a lot of issues working against Conor that led to him not having many fights booked, but the reality is Dana has held him back a lot. Conor's next fight would be in 2020, and in this build-up in between 2018 and 2019, we saw Conor gunning for fights relentlessly. He threatened retirement, he wanted to fight Justin Gaethje, he wanted to go box again. There's a lot of things that Conor wanted to do, and Conor clearly wanted to fight, but Dana did not book him. Now, Dana is obligated to offer every fighter 3 fights a year, except there's a lot of asterisks around that. Now, the rules around this are of course muddy, but based off what we know, especially from Nate Diaz and Francis Ngannou, even though you're offered 3 fights a year, he can offer you a pretty shitty fight that you're not going to want to take. For example, with Nate, he was offered a bunch of killers before he eventually landed on Hamzat and decided to just take the fight. Dana is putting them in a position where technically it is them saying no to a fight, even though it's a fight they might not want. And it doesn't even have to be the opponent. He can be offering them really bad money on a really bad date. He might not put them on a pay-per-view. So there's a lot of ways that you can still be offered fights, but them not be realistic options in any capacity. And that's definitely what was going on with Conor, and why we saw the retirement, why we saw Conor doing interviews where he was frustrated with the UFC. In McGregor Forever, that was a real highlight, and it really showed why Conor took so long to fight, and why when he came back, he kept on wanting to say he wanted a season. Because what I was saying about your prime and being in the fighter shape, in the fighter attitude, in the fighter mindset, you need to have consistent fights time and time again, because it's really hard to train at full capacity when you don't have anything to fight for. So the Cowboy fight happens in January, and he took no damage, so he was like, let me get my next fight pretty much immediately, and they were like, no, you need time off. And if you don't know, there's a lot of talks of rebooking Conor vs Khabib right there and then, Conor vs Nate 3, Conor vs Gaethje. These were all fights on the table, and Dana, for one reason or the other, didn't want to get them done. Now, that could be because Khabib was backed up, that could be because they wanted to get Conor in there again. Nate really wasn't doing anything too significant at that time. He did fight Masvidal and just beat him. That was the other big fight, Conor vs Masvidal. Dana says Masvidal is too big, but these were all fights that were massive at the time that Conor wanted. And eventually he keeps on getting sideline on sideline, frustrated again, and then COVID happens. Now, Conor did retire, I think like 2 or 3 times during COVID, but the reality is that was another set of time where he wasn't able to train for a fight. Now, a lot of the details on Conor vs Dustin 2 have been lost a lot in translation. Conor was frustrated with the UFC, so he then decided he was gonna have a charity match with Manny Pacquiao in boxing, and then that fight fell through, and then Dustin said, I will box you for charity. Of course, the UFC sees this and like, if you're gonna fight, you're gonna fight in the UFC, and Dustin was coming off a fight with Dan Hooker, and Dustin has always been an active fighter, and yeah, he had some layoff in between Hooker and the fight before. It wasn't like Dustin was dealing with the ring rust Conor was. If Conor is not at his fighting best and fighting and active against Dustin Poirier, he's gonna get punished. And although at the time a lot of casual fans didn't realize how good Dustin was, we all know what happens. And with Conor getting knocked out, though, one time they should probably wait over a year or so to book him again. They book him again in July. So Conor taking basically no recovery time after getting knocked out, probably cold, although that is debated if he was out cold. We'd then have Conor going in again against Dustin and losing and snapping his leg. That was in July of 2021. and as of now in 2024, Conor still has not fought. And obviously that recovery time is huge, and of course there's been so many times athletes have never been able to come back the same, but Conor said he was good to fight basically a year and a half ago. And once you take out the Conor over exaggeration, we can just dumb it down to basically a year ago, and we had Conor and Chandler on Tough, and this has basically been the fight the whole time. And now Chandler is getting sat out, and this fight still has not been booked. And Dana just said that they're gonna book the fight for fall, when Conor came out and said they're gonna fight in June. And in between all this time, Conor has done interviews saying the UFC just does not want to fight him. Dana is coming out saying we're gonna fight Conor, we're gonna fight Conor, of course we're gonna fight Conor whenever we can. So this has caused a lot of issues because Conor is now 35 and he will turn 36 in July, and they had the prime opportunity to book him for 300. Time of recording, 300 is still not announced. I have no idea what it's going to be, but it's seemingly not Conor Chandler. And Dana has had a history of not fighting fighters because Conor is such a huge leveraging piece for advertisers, for ESPN, and getting a Conor McGregor pay-per-view, and all of these theories as to why Dana hasn't fought Conor when he's clearly ready and there's clearly reason to. And a lot of people think that the UFC tries to optimize Conor fights too much, in the sense that they're trying to get the perfect pay-per-view and get the most amount of money possible every single time he fights. Now that of course makes sense, but at the same time, if you're just sitting him, you might as well just fight him because that prime time may never come. And also at the same time, you don't know how many fights Conor has left. Do you really want to sit him when he's about to be 36 and he's just getting worse and worse? The hype is going to die down. So they may also be looking at this like they have one major Conor pay-per-view left, because if he goes out there and gets destroyed, you know he's still going to be a star, but that star is not going to be nearly as big as before. Chandler runs through Conor. This might be their last chance. That is another theory as to why they're holding him out. Like I was alluding to earlier, the whole ESPN theory and the fact that they want to promise ESPN that they're going to get another Conor pay-per-view because their deal is running out with ESPN. And then there's also the theory that Dana and Conor are just not on the same page in any capacity. Dana doesn't appreciate Conor saying he's going to go box, and with Conor only having 2 fights left on his contract, he's made it really clear that he wants to go box at some point. So if he wants to go fight Jake Paul or Manny Pacquiao, they might be with after this, because with only 2 fights left on your deal, a lot of times when you have a major star like that, you're going to sit them and make sure that you're locking them in for a good amount of time. So the reality is we haven't really had Conor be in his prime since he fought Eddie, because there's so many conditions with time off and layoffs that we just know in MMA you're not fighting at your best. And I'm not making excuses for Conor because that's really on him. There have been outliers like Dominic Cruz, GSP, who have come back and become champions again after so much time off, but the vast majority of fighters don't agree with that logic. And even so, even if you do think Conor is at his best, that means from 28 we saw Conor fought Khabib, Cowboy, and Dustin twice. That is 4 fights within his supposed prime, which is absolutely ridiculous for your biggest star. And you could honestly say that's the UFC's biggest fumble, is how they handle Conor. That opinion isn't uncommon because even though they've made a lot of money off Conor, they've blown up off Conor, and their biggest pay-per-views are all Conor, he really hasn't fought as much as other fighters. Kevin Holland fought 5 times in 2020 alone. That's more fights than Conor has had in the past 5 years, which is absolutely ridiculous that the UFC fumbled the bag this bad on Conor, and a lot of it is on his own volition, but he's clearly been wanting to fight at times and they have not been able to book him. He literally came out and said he wanted to have a season in 2020. Of course COVID happened, but he still was struggling to get a fight as is because the UFC just wants to optimize their money with him as much as possible, mainly because he probably has the highest guaranteed bag out of any fighter. So I wonder how much money they really make off those events, because they have to pay so much more for Conor specifically than they do any other event. And a big thing too is they don't want to have champs on Conor McGregor cards, because if you don't know, basically the only one besides Conor that has pay-per-view points, which is a percentage of the pay-per-view sale, are the UFC champs. So if you put too many champs under Conor on the card, they're going to get a lot of money, whereas if you wait for them for another card, they're not going to get paid as much. And the narrative the UFC runs with is they don't want to have a non-pay-per-view on the top of the bill above a champion card. Now that logic does make sense, but come on now, I think it's just because they know that they are going to have to pay out their champions a whole lot more, and anything regarding a Conor card, everyone's going to renegotiate their contracts so they can get the most amount of money possible to help build up a Conor card, because in general most of his cards have been kind of lackluster. Specifically the Conor Cowboy one was absolutely horrendous. If you enjoyed this video, check out this one on Conor McGregor versus Khabib and who had the better career. Let me know, am I way off here? Is Conor really had his prime? Am I just making excuses? Am I being a glazer? So leave a like, subscribe, and don't forget, we're just getting started. We're gonna stay consistent, and I'll see you in the next video.